again, welcome. Thank you for joining us today for this important conversation about how distributed power plants, or DPPs, also known as you may have heard them referred to as virtual power plants, can power Minnesota while creating jobs, lowering energy costs, and strengthening our grid. My name is Patty O'Keefe. I am the Midwest Regional Director at Vote Solar, an organization that is working to transition us to a equitable energy future with solar as a big part of that. I'm going to be moderating today's discussion. We have a fantastic lineup of experts who are going to break down how Minnesota can unlock the benefits of DPPs and what's needed to make that happen. For those who aren't familiar, DPPs are a smarter, more efficient way to power our communities instead of relying on big, expensive power plants. DPPs tap into rooftop solar, battery storage, and smart technology to provide reliable, clean energy when and where it's needed most. And the approach isn't just theoretical, it's already working in other states, and we're excited to explore how it can work here in Minnesota. So throughout the conversation today, feel free to drop your questions in the chat. We'll do our best to answer some in real time and address others during the Q&A portion at the end of the call. But before we dive in, let me introduce our speakers. So we have Shannon Anderson, who's the Distributed Power Plant Policy Director at Solar United Neighbors, or SUN, where she coordinates SUN's work to expand access to distributed power plants across the country. She'll start us off today by walking through what DPPs are and why they're such an exciting opportunity for Minnesota. And then we have Beren Argetsinger, who is a partner at the law firm Keys & Fox. His practice focuses on electric utility regulation and the expansion of regulated market opportunities for distributed energy resources through the development and implementation of distributed power plant programs. He'll be giving us an overview of the policy landscape, including SUN's model bill and where things stand in Minnesota. Sarah Whebbe is the Senior Policy and Regulatory Affairs Associate for the Minnesota Solar Energy Industries Association, also known as MnSEIA. She's also currently attending Mitchell-Hamline School of Law, where she's expected to graduate in spring of 2025. And before pivoting to policy work, Sarah had an extensive background in the direct deployment of distributed solar energy and energy storage technologies to the electric grid. She'll be speaking about the economic and business opportunities that DPPs can create in Minnesota. And then we have Bobby King, who's the Minnesota State Director at Solar United Neighbors, a role he's held since 2020. Prior to that, he was the Policy and Organizing Director at the Land Stewardship Project, where he worked on grassroots organizing and policy advocacy. So we have a great discussion ahead, so let's get started. First up, we have Shannon Anderson with SUN to walk us through what DPPs are and the opportunities that they present for Minnesota. Shannon, over to you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Great to have so many interested folks on this presentation today to talk about distributed power plants in Minnesota. So I am the Distributed Power Plant Policy Director for Solar United Neighbors. Solar United Neighbors is a vendor-neutral national nonprofit that helps people go solar. We've helped over 10,000 families across the country utilize the power of the sun to generate their own energy. And this has saved a lot of money for folks, as well as generated jobs and investments in communities. So we help people go solar, join together, and fight for our energy rights. And so we both kind of run an organization component that helps people go solar, but then also once people go solar, to understand the policy consequences that legislators and utility commissions enact. So that's why we're here today, to kind of talk through a policy that can be beneficial for solar and storage within the state of Minnesota. And that's a distributed power plant. So as Patty was saying, distributed power plant is really kind of bundling together solar storage, smart thermostats, other resources that you have in your home, to the point that they're large enough that they actually are effectively a power plant on the grid. So for those of you with solar, you know that there's certain times of the day that you are generating more solar energy than you're consuming, and you export that extra power to the grid. If you add in battery storage to your home, then you're able to use some of that extra solar power to charge up the batteries. And then that stored power is available on demand for the utility. And when bundled together with hundreds or thousands of homes throughout the state of Minnesota, essentially you'll have enough power as our traditional peaking power plants. So we're talking megawatts of power available on demand for the utility when it's needed most. So distributed power plants, again, they leverage customer assets. And the idea behind them is they reduce peak demand and improve the efficiency of larger grid assets as well. And again, the goal here is to provide relief exactly when and where the grid needs it most. So they're an incredible resource that is really available as energy demand increases and we need solutions on the grid. So distributed power plants, they're available now. They're off-the-shelf technology. Again, they're happening in other places, including actually Minnesota. There's a few kind of pilot projects already going on. And there's no long permitting or construction delays. A lot of folks have heard about the delays it takes to get larger scale resources like utility scale solar onto the grid. Distributed power plants aren't like that. They can be deployed in months. So really fast resources to meet growing power demand. Distributed power plants create a lot of value for utility customers, $10 billion potentially, or 15 to 35 even, if we scale up distributed power plants in a much more significant way across the country. Notably, again, 40 to 60% less as far as the cost than other sorts of power plant resources that are being built. So they're cost effective, they're available now, and we hope to really get this policy enacted in Minnesota so you can have that benefit in your state. And there's layers of benefits as well. So there's benefits for the folks that want to go solar, adopt batteries. There's incentive programs that can help you do that. You'll get compensation for the use of your resources on the grid. And then again, community-wide benefits as well. So lower energy bills, local workforce and economic development opportunities, which Sarah will be talking a little bit about as well. And I just like to highlight these stats because to me they are staggering and really show the opportunity here. So Energy Hub is a company that often works with utilities to manage their virtual power plant or distributed power plant systems. So 44 gigawatts of electricity out of peak demand because of VPPs just last year. 2,000 megawatts of dispatchable flexibility for over 70 utilities around the country, over 100,000 enrolled devices. So again, this is the smart thermostats, smart appliances, battery storage technology. So just tremendous opportunity for utilities around the country and in Minnesota to take that peak power demand and really shave it and create customer cost savings. So the scale of distributed power plant potential in Minnesota is very significant. Minnesota already has 400 megawatts of customer-sited solar. So that provides an incredible base that's available right now, ready to deploy as soon as the utility can stand up a program. But then if solar customers add battery storage, solar, customers with existing battery storage or new solar customers with new battery storage, all of these folks would be eligible to participate in a program. And so again, we're talking hundreds of megawatts of potential for these programs in Minnesota alone. And this just highlights, again, sort of where the opportunity is going. You see the largest, of course, megawatt installation for solar in Minnesota has been utility scale or like larger solar installations. But residential solar is growing, community solar is growing, and these customer-sited resources provide tremendous opportunity through these distributed power plant systems because, again, these are installations that are being funded directly by customers. They're available quickly, and they're able to be, again, bundled together throughout the state in a way that works like a traditional power plant would in one location. So I will turn it over to Beren.
Great, thanks, Shannon. So there has been a lot of attention around distributed power plants, building on some of the recent work by the Department of Energy and their liftoff reports, and other really great work highlighting the need for a substantial amount of new capacity to come online in a short time period to both fill the gap from planned fossil fuel generator retirements, but also to meet anticipated load growth. So as Shannon just discussed, distributed energy resources have an enormous potential to help meet some of these needs. But in order to unlock that opportunity and that value that we can get from distributed energy resources, we need program frameworks that actually let customers make their resources available to provide grid support services, but also receive compensation for providing those services. So a distributed power plant program is really, I think we can think of it as like an organizing framework almost, a programmatic framework for the coordination, for coordinating the operation of potentially thousands of DERs to reduce load and inject energy into the grid precisely when it's needed most to provide different types of grid support services. So the question then becomes, what's the best way to create that type of program framework for DERs to provide the different services that we would be looking for them to deliver? The Solar United Neighbors model distributed power plant policy really builds on successes and lessons learned from programs operating around the country to help policymakers, regulators, stakeholders develop and implement and accelerate BPP program adoption at scale for customer-sited DERs to provide capacity, peak load reduction, and other support services that are really needed in a short period of time. So I think what this quote is really helping to demonstrate is that while there is certainly recognition and there's movement around virtual power plants, and utilities have the opportunity to implement these types of programs, legislative policy guidance really has a crucial role to play in program design and implementation. And this is not limited just to requirements that utilities develop programs to help meet these grid needs that they've identified. But it's also to ensure that the programs are designed and implemented in a way that is consistent with states' broader clean energy goals and other public policy goals. Why don't we go to the next slide? And so this is, really kind of getting at why legislation is important and needed in Minnesota to get distributed power plant programs up and off the ground in the state in a way that helps us meet the goals that the state has identified. So SUN's model legislation really helps establish the statutory directives for how a DPP program should be designed, specifically through an open access and standard offer tariff-based program framework. The model policy addresses who is eligible to participate to ensure opportunities for different types of customers, customers with different types of DERs, and also to ensure that customers with non-utility owned distributed energy resources have a program pathway to provide these services. It provides a compensation structure to ensure fair value for the grid services that are actually delivered and provided by these customer resources. Sets expectations for program implementation timelines. And it includes other provisions to help scale and accelerate the use of distributed power plant programs to help meet clean energy goals, and it provides guardrails to ensure The utility is not allowed to unfairly exercise its monopoly power to gain unfair competitive advantages over non-utility, solar, battery storage, and other types of DER providers. Again, to ensure that there's this, kind of a fair playing field in being able to provide grid support services through a DPP type of program. Now we hop to the next slide. So, kind of in short, not only does the legislation provide a program design and implementation guidance for the implementing agencies, in this case, the Public Utilities Commission, but it provides important consumer protection guardrails and ensures equitable access to DERs and DPP program opportunities. We can go to the next slide. So from there, I think important to highlight really some key principles of Solar United Neighbors model policy legislation and how it helps achieve these goals that we were just talking about. So I think it's important to just kind of step back and just think about, what's at the core of any distributed power plant program is the participating customer. And the success of these types of program really depends on customers making their resources available to support the grid instead of using them to meet their own needs if that kind of doesn't necessarily align with when the grid needs that resource at that particular time. And so thinking about these, the program design from the customer perspective is really important. And that's where Sun's model bill key principles are really kind of emanating from. And so for, we just kind of talk through some of these. For fair compensation, just think about a customer with, for instance, with battery storage who may have purchased that to provide backup power for their home, but could also be used to discharge that to reduce their load and export any additional power to the grid during, for instance, a peak demand event on a hot summer day, for instance. But in order to incentivize that type of change in the customer's use of their battery, there must be a program structure in place to provide compensation for that service. And so Sun's model policy establishes a kind of a standard offer compensation model for customers who enroll and participate. And so they know upfront what they will receive from participating in the program. The open access component is also really important. DEPP program success is dependent on, many customers enrolling their resources to sort of build up like a kind of a critical mass of capacity and to make that available to the utility for when it needs it most. I think a good example is sort of the system peak demand sort of period. So the open access principle really ensures that any customer with an eligible device is able to enroll and to participate. And I think it's important to emphasize that Sun's model policy really creates a participation pathway for different types of technologies to ensure sort of a technology inclusive approach to attract broad participation amongst different types of DER. So we can think about battery storage, but we also think about electric vehicles and also think about, kind of traditional load control devices like a smart thermostat. So each of these different technologies would have a participation pathway to provide grid support services through a DPP program under Sun's model policy. Equitable access to these programs is a crucial component, and Sun's model bill includes provisions to ensure equitable access to individuals living in environmental justice communities and across the income spectrum so that all customers have an opportunity to benefit from not just participation in the program, but to help spur and increase DER adoption, which is obviously also crucial to expanding the enrollment in the programs themselves as well. So if we go to the next slide, thank you. And affordability and cost savings is another just really important principle to be thinking about when designing a program like this. So DPPs can be designed to provide multiple different types of grid support services, but a key base level service is again for that peak load reduction type of service. So it's a good example to just sort of demonstrate or to illustrate the types of cost savings that can come from utilizing a DPP program. So helping to displace or reduce reliance on more expensive grid scale generators, which are also often lower efficiency or higher emission fossil fuel generators. So utilizing a DPP program, dispatching these customer assets, and sort of shift load to reduce reliance on those resources, which also reduces costs, and those cost savings can be spread across to all customers to help, keep electricity bills lower and reduce the kind of increase in cost from the utility side. Facilitating electrification, I think, is a really important one to highlight as well, just because of the as we're moving to a more electrified economy. Kind of going back to the peak load reduction service as another way to illustrate this. The DPP program helps the utility better manage its load, and that helps us facilitate greater electrification of homes and businesses that would otherwise put increased stress on the grid as we're drawing more power from the grid to support those electrified resources. And as the double benefit of then also providing a participation pathway for these resources and enroll in the program and to help align their operations with the grid needs. And then lastly, DPP programs can be rapidly deployed and scaled. This is something that Shannon was touching on just before. It's important to recognize this opportunity from a policymaker standpoint and from a utility standpoint as we're thinking about kind of grid planning needs and how are we going to meet these load requirements and make up that gap in sort of like our the meeting the capacity that we're going to need with the retiring fossil fuels plants and growing load. DPPs incorporate readily available technology and optimize the use of existing system assets. And it's non-utility DER aggregators and other related companies in the DER industry that have deep experience in deploying and managing these types of resources that can be readily tapped into in partnership with the utility to stand up DPP programs, enroll customers in those programs, and then help manage those resources within the parameters of the program to help the utility meet the grid service and kind of grid support needs that it's setting out to provide through a DPP program itself. So I think with that, I'm going to pass it over to Sarah.
Thank you, Beren. Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here today. My name is Sarah Whebbe. I'm the Senior Policy and Regulatory Affairs Associate with MnSEIA. MnSEIA stands for Minnesota Solar Energy Industry Association, and we are a nonprofit trade association of over 170 members, and we represent a broad cross-section of Minnesota's solar and storage industry. Our membership includes everyone from rooftop solar installers, storage installers, nonprofit organizations, manufacturers of equipment, and many others, all of whom collectively employ over 5,000 Minnesotans. So we are here today to talk about the economic impact of solar. Thank you. So to touch on first the distributed economic potential of distributed power plants, at the heart of this technology, the benefit that it will provide is that the job creation that is going to be required to deploy a distributed power plant will be local. Distributed power plants rely heavily on distributed energy resources like rooftop solar, behind the meter battery storage, and electric vehicle charging. And the installation and maintenance of this type of infrastructure will create a significant need for skilled electricians and others to install, connect, and maintain these systems. So it's going to, in order to build and maintain a virtual power plant, it's going to create and maintain new jobs and unlike traditional power plants where those jobs would be concentrated in a specific region, virtual power plants, oh, I'm sorry, next slide. Yeah, virtual power plants and the jobs to support them will be distributed across the state. And we're already starting to see this happen. You know, DEED released a report within the last year that noted that, first of all, the growth in employment in this area, they consider it electricity generation employment, especially employment within clean generation, has corresponded to the increasing share of Minnesota's electricity coming from renewable energy resources. And while the Twin Cities metro area has historically held the majority of Minnesota's clean energy jobs, Greater Minnesota is now beginning to outpace the metro in clean energy job growth. And DEED calculated that if even a third of northwestern Minnesota counties had an electrical contractor that was doing solar and storage installations and employed 5 people, that would bump solar and storage related employment up by an additional 45 jobs. And so I think the key point that we're trying to make is that these are long-term, locally based, community-based jobs that are similar to like a career or a job in HVAC or plumbing or the electrical trade. So I think that, next slide here. Oh yeah, I think the important thing for us also to keep in mind is that because these jobs are regional and localized, as the distributed generation market grows, there will be a need for specialized training programs in regional locations and in communities to support workers with the necessary skills to install and maintain and operate these complex systems. And oftentimes in solar, what you see, or in solar and storage, what you see is a career ladder, pretty similar to any apprenticeship program where you have a training program designed to equip individuals with hands-on experience and technical skills needed for installation and maintenance of these systems. And then oftentimes you'll have an individual go through that training program or just start with an installer without completing a training program and begin to work on projects that increase in complexity. And of course, their wages go up and their career prospects grow with each passing year. And they're able to do this without a lot of college debt. It is entirely possible to develop your career in virtual power plants and in solar and storage without a 4-year degree and the associated debt hanging over your head. There's also a lot of advancement in developing technical training centers at local community and technical colleges, and these can provide specialized degrees and certifications. And that's the summary of what I have. Thank you, Sun and Vote Solar, for hosting today. I think I'm the last panelist, so I'm just gonna hand it off to the hosts.
Yeah, I think you are. And I realized because no one got to introduce Patty, she probably skipped over the Vote Solar introduction. So if she wanted to do that, that would be great.
Oh, thank you so much, Shannon. I appreciate that. I realized that I had kind of had skipped that. So thank you. So yeah, just again, I am with Vote Solar. I'm the Midwest Regional Director at Vote Solar. And Vote Solar is working for 100% clean powered future that supports the needs, health, and well-being of everyone in the US, with solar energy leading the way. We focus on solar energy because it's plentiful, it's popular, and has the unique ability to shift power, literally and figuratively, over energy decision-making to real people who overwhelmingly support a rapid transition to clean energy. We were founded in 2002. We do most of our advocacy in state legislature and regulatory areas. And I think we kind of try to straddle the role of bringing a lot of expertise around solar energy in the transition, but also bringing a really strong equity lens and really believing that this work, it's important for people who have been most burdened by our energy system to, have as much access as everyone else does, to this technology. So thank you for allowing me to go back and share that. And just want to say thank you to Sarah and to all of our speakers for sharing their insights today. It's, I think, made pretty clear that DPPs represent a really huge opportunity here for Minnesota to help us build a more resilient and affordable and locally powered energy system while, doing a lot of good things like creating good jobs and growing our economy. So we've covered a lot of ground, from how DPPs work to the policy solutions that we'll need to scale them and the business and workforce benefits that they can bring. And now we want to hear from all of you. So we'll move into our Q&A section. And I'm going to be pulling questions from the chat or from our Q&A tab here, and we'll direct them to our panelists. So to get started, we had a couple questions come through the Q&A. The first one here is, could someone please share who would be the main opposition to DPP/VPPs in Minnesota? These seem so great. Who would be against this? And I don't know, who would like to answer that question? Shannon?
Yeah, sure. I could start and others can fill in. It's interesting, actually. Distributed power plants are very bipartisan. They've had, I think, a lot of bipartisan support in other states where they've been implemented. A bill just passed Virginia, for instance, with a fairly significant bipartisan vote in the House, and even with utility support for that bill. So there is, I think, opposition from some entrenched interests that just, are maybe anti-rooftop solar, or don't really see the benefits for their communities of that kind of energy source. But in general, these programs are very, supported by a wide range of folks. And the benefits are so real that people, it's hard to deny them, and people get behind them fairly quickly.
Another question we have is, please describe the best resources to use to counter the any opposition to DPPs or VPPs in Minnesota. I answered some of that question with just that there's some great data-driven reports that demonstrate the cost savings and the job opportunities and grid reliability potential, and then pointing to examples, successful examples in other states, as well as working together as a coalition to really push for these in-state venues. Anything else that our panelists would kind of add on to what are some good resources to counter any opposition we might encounter?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that the greatest resource is actually you, right? So those of you that are solar homeowners, have battery storage, want to adopt this technology and be part of the solution. You know how this technology works, you know how effective it is, what it means to your energy bills. And so the more I think folks can get involved and be a part of the conversation in Minnesota, the more successful we'll be.
And then Sarah, I saw you come off mute.
Yeah, I think I'd just like to add that I think in general, the greatest opposition won't necessarily come from individuals, but it will come from the challenge of educating lawmakers about this technology, how it works, the many nuances of integrating it into the grid and into grid planning. I think that there might be some hesitancy on the part of some utilities as well, maybe not investor-owned utilities, but cooperative utilities and municipal utilities that have smaller staff sizes might find the idea of switching to a totally new technology to be daunting. And so a lot of our work will be in working on those relationships, and then also, again, educating regulators and lawmakers about how this works.
Thanks, Sarah. And I'm seeing lots of questions coming in the Q&A and the chat. Appreciate folks engaging. So next question we have, and this is a timely one. Are incentives safe over the next few years with our new president? Anyone have information there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, very timely. As of now, yes. And I would say that there is a broad coalition of support for, I think you probably mean the incentives within the Inflation Reduction Act, and tax credits that are available at the federal level. And those policies, again, are supported with bipartisan majority support, and there's a constituency that's getting active and engaged and meeting with members of Congress. So if you're interested in helping Sun and Vote Solar and SEIA nationally and others defend the tax credits for solar and battery storage, let us know, because we are setting up meetings with members of Congress and really trying to support that work. Additionally, of course, there's other kind of funding that's been available, and including some funding, particularly for rural electric cooperatives to do grid modernization. Some rural electric cooperatives across the country have actually used some of that funding to implement a distributed power plant program. So we're hoping that funding also remains a priority from Congress and the Department of Energy and other supporters of that work. It's critical, as Sarah was just explaining, a lot of, smaller utilities don't have often the resources to get these programs off the ground the way larger utilities do. So the more, the funding that was created from the federal government serves an important purpose there as well. So yeah, no one has a crystal ball, but I think we're doing what we can to try and make sure that the opportunities exist going forward for folks to be able to go solar with the incentives that are currently in place.
Thank you. We have a question here on whether someone can discuss DPPs and the large energy demands of AI data centers wanting to move to Minnesota. And this, there's multiple bills at the state legislature that are working to incentivize data centers coming to Minnesota, and will probably be some bills also really supporting guardrails around that. But yeah, that's, I think, a huge question, is that we're with the uptick in these big mega data centers that are coming into states, especially like northern states in the US. We're expected to see steep load growth, which means that more than ever, we are going to need solutions like DPPs that are able to take as much strain off the grid as possible and make sure that we, are not going to be requiring tons more baseload power, from energy that is not clean. And right now, there's already proposals to build a bunch of diesel backup generators for data centers in Minnesota, and data centers are being used as excuses to keep coal and gas plants online longer across the country. And so I think that this actually is kind of it's an opportunity for, to advocate for distributed power plants, because we are going to need every tool that we need, and especially those tools that make our grid more efficient and reduce the need for baseload power. Does anyone want to add to that?
Yeah, I would just add as well. So Sun's model policy is really focused on residential systems, but as Patty was explaining, that actually reduces load for everybody, which is helpful as we're getting, data centers and other sorts of really energy intensive uses onto the system. And additionally, if a utility kind of stands up a program for residential, it's then available to, kind of blend in commercial and industrial systems as well. So it's, it doesn't have to be exclusive to residential systems. It can be used for other programs as well. So, having that set up for residential helps a utility kind of create the framework that then could be used for larger customers.
So our next question is, what are prospects for legislation being passed this year on DPPs? And a follow-up to that, would it be helpful to contact our legislators, and how would we refer to the model proposal if we contact them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we're actively working with several legislators to try and get bills introduced this year in Minnesota. We will be in touch, as I know Vote Solar and our partner groups will as well, once we have those bills, and we'll let you know kind of the way to take action in timely manner. I think folks, are aware of this, but the legislature is really busy, has lots of bills. And so we really focus action alerts when they can be most timely and effective for your voice to reach lawmakers. And so stay tuned, and we will keep you posted. And yeah, we really, we're excited, I think, for the opportunity in Minnesota this year. And yeah, looking forward to engaging you all in that process.
This one's a bit more of a technical question. Once distributed power nodes are set up, solar, battery sites, etc., what maintenance jobs are needed? Aren't these assets reliable with little maintenance needed?
Thanks. I was just typing an answer out. This is a great question, Jody. Thank you for asking it. So a solar and storage installation is going to have a very long life. Many of them are, the various components in an installation are warranted for 20 years. Some of them have 10-year warranties, but you're expecting, you're kind of signing on for long-term care and operation of a stationary system. A key difference between solar and storage and other types of generating plants is that solar does not move once you install it. And so maintenance concerns are very low, generally. However, if the power being generated by solar and being exported to the grid by a battery is power that the entire, electric grid is relying on, then it's really important to maintain that system in excellent, reliable working condition at all times. And so things that might happen, honestly, are like software updates. I know that sounds really silly, but a lot of the time people will get a software update pushed out by like a manufacturer, and that might cause the need to kind of update other things and just pay attention to where information is flowing or getting locked up. Inverters might need replacement sometime in 20 years. The inverter is the component that takes power from DC to AC and has a little bit more wear on it than panels. And, occasionally you have like the need to remove and reinstall panels after a hailstorm, or the need to, maybe even update a systems. Oftentimes people will add on additional storage, people will add on additional panels as their need changes. So all of those types of jobs, will continue to exist long after the initial installation of a system to support its operation.
Thanks, Sarah. Next question is, who are the likely third-party power aggregators for the VPP system in Minnesota? Who will be the main contact or driver at the level of REC utility? So I think rural electric cooperative.
Yeah, this might be a question for Sarah too, just in terms of your membership, but there's a number of companies that currently actually don't operate at scale in Minnesota that are very interested and eager to come to Minnesota and be a part of the energy solution there. That would be able to be, a third-party aggregator for a distributed power plant system. Companies like Sunrun and Sonova and GoodLeap, Energy Hub, again, they operate in other states. That already have these programs in place and are really excited, I think, about what Minnesota can be for their business model. And hopefully, again, will also create that benefit for customers who will have an additional avenue to be able to go solar through, a lot of these companies kind of help you go solar with a zero down payment or other sort of opportunity that maybe doesn't currently exist in Minnesota right now.
That's a great answer, Shannon. And I think I would just add that in terms of the main point of contact or driver at the level of the cooperative, I think that'll really depend on the cooperative to some extent. There are 67, correct me if I'm wrong, anyone, but 67 cooperatives in Minnesota, and they are all different. They all have different staff sizes and different needs that they're supporting. What I will say is that they all have boards. And if you are a cooperative utility customer, you always have the opportunity to vote on your utility board, and that board does have influence over the directors and the managers of cooperative utilities. So that is a place for the public to get involved. Otherwise, decision-making does usually come down to the president of the co-op or a finance director.
Thank you. A few more questions here. One is, what are the economies of scale for DPPs? How many DER units are needed to make economic sense for this strategy? And is the scale in rural Minnesota adequate? So that's a few questions. So what are the economies of scale for DPPs? How many DER units are needed to make economic sense for this strategy? And start there.
Yeah, and I might need to phone a friend with Beren on this one, but it's generally, again, we're talking like hundreds of megawatts of potential that is sort of bundled together. And that's, a typical kind of program size around the country is, somewhere between, 100 to 400 megawatts typically. But even in, rural utility territory, you can't have a smaller system that's still cost effective. And it just, again, varies kind of utility by utility, what the incentives would be, performance payments, how the structure of the program can be designed to make it economic.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I think part of the calculus for all of this too is the type of service that you're trying to provide through the program. And this goes back to one of the, maybe another kind of key design principle in Solar United Neighbors model policy. And that is to start out with a VPP program that targets a system-wide peak reduction to make the service that's being offered and that the DPP will provide open to customers across the utility service territory, so that customers that are in a rural area or customers that are in a more populated area, when they are called upon, their device is providing a system-wide service. As the program grows and you get additional participation, and the utility may target specific areas on its grid that need more attention, you can tailor the performance incentive payments to incentivize customers to deploy DERs, enroll in the program to get kind of that critical mass of capacity in those particular areas to help address the needs that are identified for those location-specific areas. But I think the bottom line really is that a distributed power plant can start out at a very low capacity and just scale over time, because these are resources that are being adopted by customers because they want the benefits that the resource provides to the customer, but we're making it available to align and meet grid needs through the DPP program. And so it really provides a glide path almost for just scaling over time, but making the resource available to the utility sort of immediately as soon as the program gets off the ground.
Yeah, and if I could add too, I mean, that's partly, I think, why the policy is so important as well, because we want these programs to be easy to enroll in. We want, again, like customer benefits to be clear, people understand their rights and responsibilities and participation. And if you don't have that policy framework in place, folks are going to be less inclined to participate. And that, you know, as we've seen kind of in programs that have failed around the country is often because not enough people participate. And so we do want a program that has the right policy framework in place to incentivize and encourage and make it easy for people to enroll.
All right, we have another question coming in. Could you also discuss the differences in getting DPPs in a regulated utility state like Minnesota versus the process in an unregulated utility state like Texas?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you often hear about Texas being sort of the wild, wild west of the utility world. And there are quite a few successful programs in Texas because of the ability to directly connect to the wholesale market there. But Minnesota and other states have a lot of opportunity as well. And essentially it works pretty much the same. You have your rooftop solar and battery storage technology, your smart thermostats at the home level. You connect with the utility and you provide those grid services. So it's, you know, essentially working the same, whether you're working directly with a retail utility like you would in Minnesota or some other ability to, again, sort of directly connect to the wholesale market like you can potentially do in Texas. There are retail programs in Texas as well that are incredibly, you know, they can be successful as well there. And I will note Excel's kind of sister company in Colorado is just launching a program there because of state legislation that passed in 2024. And Colorado, of course, is a vertically integrated state, just like Minnesota. And so, you know, there are, again, you know, examples out there, including in Excel territory and other states where these programs can be successful.
All right, we have time for just a couple more questions. So we got one related to whether we have promotional materials available for Earth Day events. I think so what we're planning to do is be in touch with everyone here about opportunities to get involved regarding the legislation that we are hoping to move forward this session. I believe that Sun also has like a one-pager on distributed power plants. But I don't think we have much more than that, and folks can correct me if I'm wrong there. So
I would just say, yeah, stay tuned. Again, we'll be sending out action alerts and providing fact sheets and information once a bill gets introduced and starts moving, hopefully soon.
cool. There's another question here. Are there safety concerns with backfeeding that it says backfeeding that scare smaller cooperative utilities?
I think I can take that. I think that in general, all electric utilities are becoming accustomed to how to manage the energy prosumer backfeeding onto the grid, whether it's from a virtual power plant or storage. That being said, the technology that we're working or that we're talking about incorporating into the grid is typically UL listed. It's typically gone through all of the engineering, testing, and standardization that utilities require in order to comfortably deploy something to the grid. But I think it is fair to say that smaller utilities and utilities in general are still exploring, you know, the control systems required to ensure that, yeah, you don't have a bunch of virtual power plant assets discharge energy and blow up a transformer. But again, those solutions are there and available, and this is a highly controlled technology, so those concerns should be resolvable.
We got a question in the chat about community solar in Minnesota and that it seems to have declined since 2017. And why is that? Does anyone want to take that question?
I can.
Yeah.
I think in a way, community solar is somewhat a victim of its own success. That program was incredibly successful right out of the gate in a way that it will likely never quite accomplish to the scale that it started out at. Again, I think we had a year where 400 megawatts of community solar was interconnected. Part of the challenge that ensued after its initial success is that the location of installing and interconnecting a garden became constrained by this contiguous county rule. And grid constraints began to happen very quickly as a result of that rule and the success of the program. The program has now been modified. There was legislation introduced last year that, and Peggy, you might be able to speak to this more than I can, but it adapted community solar to like Community Solar 2.0, which is largely targeted now towards providing energy savings to people in low income populations. Those projects are still being designed and interconnected. And there has definitely been a little bit of a delay with the Department of Commerce and other government agencies working to get them through the approval process. But they are coming online and they should be coming online in the next few years.
Thanks, Sarah. So we are just going to do a quick poll with a couple questions here at the end. Not an evaluation, just a poll to get some folks' thoughts on kind of VPPs, DPPs. So Jasmine, would you be able to pull that poll up quickly here? Okay, so there's these 3 questions if folks could just answer. So before today, how familiar were you with the concept of DPPs? What do you see as the biggest challenge to expanding DPPs in Minnesota? And then what type of incentive would most encourage you to participate in a DPP program? This will be helpful for us as we're continuing our work with advocating for DPPs in Minnesota. So you should have a little window up, and if you could take a minute to vote, that would be great. And while you're all doing that, just want to say thank you all for joining us today and for being a part of this conversation on distributed power plants in Minnesota. This is just the beginning. We're just starting to really do a concerted, organized push for this. We will be in touch with ways that you can stay engaged and help us move DPPs forward. So keep an eye on your inbox for next steps, and excited to work together to keep building this cleaner and more resilient and efficient energy grid and future together. And yeah, thank you. That brings us to 1 p.m. So thank you so much, and hope you all have a great rest of your day.